We are so grateful for the Quinn family being here tonight to honor their father. Michael was an amazing man that I was very lucky to know throughout my life. I can remember very distinctly him sitting at this desk right here on one of his many trips to Utah. He would call us up and say, "Do you want me to come and sign books?" He was an author that pushed his books all the time, which I thought was awesome. But he would come and sit down at the desk and sign every book that we had in the store. I have a few of those here today. If somebody wants a signed book, we have a couple of them here. But anyway, we appreciate them coming. We appreciate Signature Books and Barbara Brown, who is the director of Signature, for being here. She's going to be speaking tonight. Really quick, Barbara is, like I said, the director of Signature Books. She was formerly the executive director of the Mormon History Association, and she is the co-author of a very important book, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, called Vengeance is Mine, Mountain Meadows Massacre and Its Aftermath. She was also the general editor of the first edition called Massacre at Mountain Meadows, along with Rick Turley. So if you want another book of Barbara's, that's available here tonight. Without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Barbara, and she's going to tell us about tonight's event.
Sure. Thank you, Chris, and thank you for hosting us tonight. Benchmark, as you can tell by listening to Chris, has a long and storied history in Mormon studies and is a very important part of our community. So thank you for hosting us tonight. I want to thank again the Quinn family for joining us. 3 of Mike's children are here with us tonight. We have Mary Quinn, who's the oldest, Lisa Quinn Harrison, number 2, Adam Quinn, who is not with us. He passed away. He died in 1996. Mike writes about that in his memoir. And last but not least, Moshe Quinn. And also I want to acknowledge...
Can you hold that a little bit further away?
Oh, sure. Is it too loud? Okay. Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Can you all hear me in the back, too, still? Okay, great. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the Quinn children's mother, Jan, who is here. And also...
Higher. Yeah, there you go.
And also Mike's sister, Patricia, who is here. And other family members who are here as well. And looking around the room, I was the editor of this book and lead annotator of this book. And so I know every single person who's in this book. And I'm looking around the room, and I feel like half of you in the room tonight are in the book. So welcome to all of you for being here. We wanted to start by talking about the origin behind this remarkable memoir, which I never knew, and I think probably a lot of us never knew, that Mike wrote his memoir before he passed away in 2021. So each of the kids have their own experience. Sorry, I'm calling you kids, children, have their own experience with learning and engaging with this memoir as it developed over the years. So I'll just say, who wants to start and share their experience with the memoir? Okay, Mary will start.
So I got a copy of this memoir in 2010 after a phone discussion with my father, just saying that he had it and referencing something, and so I asked for a copy of it, and he sent me an electronic copy at that time. I wasn't aware that he had submitted that or a version to Signature prior to that conversation. But around 2010, he had told me that he intended to submit this to publishers, plural, that he did not specify who. I kind of assumed it was Signature, but apparently that had happened earlier than that conversation, and I wasn't aware of that background. But he sent it to me, and occasionally he'd ask me if I'd read it, and I was like, 500 pages. I've skimmed a little bit here and there. You know, the thing about my father and his books was if I had a question about something, I'd just ask him. And so I was like, well, if I need to know, then I've got your number. So I didn't read much of it while he was living. I read a little bit here and there, but as a good friend, namely Clifton Jolly, has noted, it's a little on the dry side in places. And so I started reading it. It was like, okay, well, maybe I'll ask him about that because that could be interesting. Reading this just makes me ask questions, and so I've got your number. I'll call you. So that was my experience with it, and I know from that conversation that he did want it published. And so after his death, we made inquiries with Gary Bergera and with Barbara a little later, but we made inquiries to kind of see if there was interest in that, because while we didn't know all the details, apparently it had not been published, whatever efforts he had made. And so my brother spearheaded that effort, and he can give his perspective on that.
This is loud. Yeah, I was not really aware of the memoir. It wasn't on my radar, and so when I was after our dad passed away, we were trying to find some photographs for his wake to prepare, for that, and so I called Signature Books to see what they might have in their archive for some like author photos or other kinds of photos. And so I talked to Gary at that time, and we had this conversation. He let me know like what he might be able to find for me, and said that he would share or send over what he was able to find. And then he mentioned something about memoirs, and if I was aware, if we were aware of his memoirs. And when he asked me that, I really didn't know what he was referring to, aside from like from my perspective, the only thing that I had in my mind was this thing that he called autobiography. That he sent to our family in 1987, might have been 1988. It was this 40-page something version of his autobiography, as it was called at that time. And I remember reading it when I was 12, and it's something that I address in the foreword as something that I always did remember, and like some stories that he shares in that autobiography always stayed with me. And that was the only version of any autobiography or any memoir that I was aware of. So I knew a lot less than Mary. But then a while later, I actually found, recently I was moving from San Francisco to Berkeley and looking through storage, and I actually found this CD-ROM that he had mailed me in 2010 that I never really quite attended to, just being busy, trying to make life work. And sometimes he would share some things with me that I just didn't have time for. So it's there. I have the entire manuscript that I never really saw until actually just the past couple of months I found it. So I was not aware at that time, like I said, but then Mary was aware, and we were talking, and realized that if it was going to be anywhere, we'd have to find it on his laptop. And it took a while for us to get there. His laptop was it was like his word processing software was WordPerfect, and it was hard to figure out like how to access the files because it was all just coming up as like gobbledygook code, whatever, random numbers. And so we had to like find some way to like format it in a way that we could actually identify which files on his computer were actually memoirs and which files were other projects he was working on. And that took a while. There were other things that we had as priorities, so it took a few months into the summer of 2021 before we were able to identify the files. And then there was a longer process, which I don't need to go into because it's probably not that interesting, of like us figuring out like, well, what do we do with this? But we definitely knew he cared a lot about the manuscript, and we knew, of course, that he wanted to share it with a larger audience. And so it was just a matter of us like figuring out like how can we shepherd that process for him, and how can we help realize his wishes and his desire for this to be read and shared with others. And so we found ourselves in conversation with Signature Books, which seemed like a good fit, because it was a household name for us really since we were young, because some of his earliest early Mormonism and Magical View, I was about this big when that came out, and so it's a long-standing relationship, and Signature Books has been a household name, and it just seemed like a really good fit for this last publication of his to be in this publishing house. And I'm not sure, Lisa, if you have your own perspectives.
Yeah, I'm glad I have a captive audience, so I'm going to set the record straight here. Because there's some kind of rumor going around that I was never given a copy of it, but I did get a copy of it too. I was given the CD at the same time as Mary was, and we actually had in 2010, she and I were reading it together at a point, and came to the same kind of conclusion that it was quite long, and quite wordy and dry. All those things I would conclude. But just to be clear, Moshe did a great job summarizing. Our dad did a lot of writing and rewriting, and so in 2010, both Mary and I took a stab at reading it. Neither of us, I think, finished it in its entirety ever. And at that point, several stories I read in that version of it, which I actually brought the CD with me today just to prove a point, that I did get it. Honestly, I could pull it out if there's any doubt. But bottom line is, he revised it a lot, and there's stories on that version that didn't even make it into the book that's published now, and probably weren't missed and didn't need to be in there. But it's just to say, like, he was modifying that into his final days, and so to go through the laptop, and my dad never updated his software, so I'm sure that was a nightmare, just trying to even get software that could read the software that was on his computer. Like, how old was that? So all of that was just a process in and of itself, just to get the data into a format that could be recoverable and sorted through. And so it was quite the project to get it into the format that then could be edited, which it did need a good come through. And I have gone through, not in its entirety, the book to some degree, and it's a joy to read. It's brought me in this short form that I've been able to scan through it closer to my dad just in the small time I've spent with that, and I look forward to giving it a good run. So back to you guys.
Thank you, Lisa. So I guess this is kind of where I come into the picture. I just started at Signature Books March 1st, 2022, and Gary Bergera, who I succeed as he retired from being director of Signature Books. He was orientating me to the job. And I remember it as being the first. I don't know how you remember it, Gary, but he brought me, the first manuscript he brought me was D. Michael Quinn's memoir. And I said, Mike Quinn wrote a memoir? Are you kidding me? So I had the hard copy. I brought it home that night and just couldn't put it down at home. I was just constantly reading it. So excited and grateful that his children brought it to us to publish and to share with all of you, to share with the world. So we started working on it, and I soon found out that Moshe dabbles in photography, or is a professional photographer, just as your dad.
Professional. I spent a lot of time on it, yeah.
Okay. So just as your dad enjoyed photography, and so I said, would you share some of your photography with us? Maybe we could use one of your photographs for the cover of your dad's book. And so if you look at the cover of the book, that is Moshe's photograph. And I was just looking through all of the photos he sent me, and I found if we zoomed in on this one, you see two paths and footsteps. So I thought, okay, that's perfect. So we brought it to our designer, Jason Francis, and he did a beautiful job designing that cover. So then the next thing I thought was, as I'm going through it, I know most of these names because I'm in my late 50s now, and I know a lot of these historians, and this is kind of my world. But I realize that people that are any younger or that aren't in the Mormon history, Mormon studies world will not know a lot of these names that Mike is talking about, or events and so forth. I mean, even today, a lot of people don't even know what the September 6th is. I talk to people in their 40s and younger, they have no idea what the September 6th means. So that's just an example. So I thought it was really important that we annotate this book so then it becomes a source, a resource for historians, not only today, but into the future as well, that they can always use as a history book and cite this important work. So that's kind of the story. And then the children just talked about how some of it was kind of dry, and I agreed as an editor. And so I was working closely with Moshe. We both wanted to honor Mike's words, but there are some places I said, this is really extraneous, can we take this out? And with Moshe's approval, we went back and forth, and sometimes he'd say, no, keep that in, and I always honored that because Moshe was representing his father. But anyway, so we did edit out about 20,000 words, but if anyone ever wants to see the entire manuscript, you're welcome to come to Signature Books, and I'll show you the whole thing, and you can learn about what he ate on his mission in March 5th, 1962.
Or we can send a CD-ROM to you.
Yeah, we'll send you a CD-ROM.
More perfect.
Yeah, so I thought the next question we could ask, I'll ask each of you, is what do you hope that people gain from reading this book, whether it's people who knew Mike, like many of you here personally, or people who never knew your dad, and future generations? And I'll let you decide who wants to go.
I'm ready
Want to
to
start?
go.
Okay.
Closest to the mic. The first thing that comes to my mind is something that I really appreciate myself, and I'm biased, I know, is I really enjoy in the memoir a sense of his voice. And it's not exactly his voice. He's writing in a certain way, and there's a certain craft, a way that it's shaped, but there is something of his voice that I can feel in the piece. There is something of his sense of humor, although I have to say, there was a way that he had this deep-throated, full-bodied laughter that is not necessarily coming across in the tone of the book. But there are ironies, and there definitely is a sense of humor that comes across that I do enjoy and appreciate. It's a little quirky, the voice, and I enjoy the quirkiness there. And so, not being very well versed in all of his other books, I share with my sisters this kind of historic sense of okay, this is maybe not our thing per se, what he would write about. But with his memoirs, I am engaged very much in the sense of a personal voice that comes across, and I can only imagine that would be interesting for a lot of people as a different kind of voice, a different kind of story, certainly, that he's telling, that I would imagine would really enrich anyone's sense of who he was, and it would really enrich the sense of how he engaged with his faith and what his faith meant to him, and how he navigated a very difficult and baffling world as he found it, in terms of trying to figure out how to square the conflict between his sexuality, his inner self, his true self, in that sense, with the other part of his true self, which was his spiritual calling and his commitment to the church. And the way that he uses his voice to tell that story, I think, is deeply compelling, and at times deeply moving. And so yeah, anyone who is interested in his writings professionally, I think, would just get a lot out of this book in terms of this personal story and this personal voice coming forward very strongly.
So I think Moshe said it very well, and I don't have a lot to add. I did get the sense, I've read about 100 pages over the last week of the copy that I have on my computer. I didn't get the hardback until today, so I look forward to that. But I think people older than myself, more my father's age, will be very interested in a lot of the familiar names, some of which rang a bell from my childhood. But a lot of people down at BYU and the leadership of the church, all these people that he writes about in this memoir, which we keep saying memoir, I think of it more as a diary, so it had dates, that he got this letter, had this conversation on this date, that kind of thing. But I think that people who are interested in the church and in the historical aspects of the church and BYU will find this very, very interesting. As far as the more personal aspect of his life, there was less there than I would have liked to have seen. I remember some years ago when I was going through, I was skipping the church part and realizing that there wasn't very much in the personal to satisfy my need to read, which was one of the reasons why I told him I did not read it. I just asked him if I had questions, because I wasn't so interested in the church part and more interested in his personal ramifications of the church part and the conflicts that he had and the ways in which he really struggled and was hurt by those kinds of things. That was interesting to me because I cared about him and really felt for him as I was reading some of those parts where he was in conflict with various people and with his faith and things that most here know about, those kinds of struggles. So hopefully you will also find those interesting, and if you're more into the church part, then I think you'll be interested even more.
Well, like I admitted just a few minutes ago, I haven't exactly poured through the book yet, but I have read enough to know that there is a lot of messages of courage and strength throughout the book that are inspiring, and I think that no matter how you perceive the information in the book and no matter where you're coming from, whether you're looking at it in terms of church history or looking at it deeper in terms of your relationship and understanding my dad at a deeper level because you know him in a certain way and are interested in that part of it. It's really fascinating, the trials that he went through in relationship to himself, in relationship to the church, and it has a lot of messages in there about strength and courage and the human spirit, what you can endure, and the fearlessness of, you know, being able to ask a question and being strong enough to face the answers, and tremendous growth that comes from that. And I think there's a great message in that for all of us. So.
Thank you. One of the things that I think the book establishes is Mike not just as a historian of Mormon history, but as a central figure in Mormon history, he himself. There are two themes that are in the introduction that come out as you read through the book, and you're right, it's not a typical memoir. And Mike acknowledged that. He said, but I never did anything typically, so why would I do this typically either? So he basically quotes from his diaries, quotes from his memoirs. He wrote several as he was going through life, and then reminiscences on what he had written before. So it's not a typical memoir, but as you read through it, two themes come out. One of those was what it was like to be a devout gay Latter-day Saint born in 1944, and the life that he chose to live based on what the teachings of the LDS Church were at the time. And that was that you could pray the gay away. We know that's not true. People are born the way they are. And but he bought into that, again, born in 1944. And so he fasted and prayed diligently throughout his teen years. He served a mission. He married in the temple. He had children. And then he comes to realize that this is who he is. That's his sexuality was who he was. And that God accepted him exactly how he was. That theme comes out. But I think it's an important story that's documented so we can understand how things were in the mid to late 20th century for queer people. The other thing that comes out was what it was like to be a professional, forthcoming historian of Mormonism in the 1970s in Leonard Arrington's Camelot. Leonard Arrington was his mentor, and how Mike's professional training, having a PhD at Yale in history and a master's in history from the University of Utah, put him at odds with church leaders at the time because he was so professional in his history telling that oftentimes he would bring to the surface things that church leaders at the time weren't ready to talk about, weren't ready to address. He was truly ahead of his time, and that put him at odds as well with his church. So those two themes emerge in this book, and again, I think establish Mike as a historical figure himself. I guess my last question, and then we'll turn it over to all of you for Q&A, is how do you think your dad would feel about seeing this memoir published now?
It's a short answer for me. I think he'd just be thrilled. And I'm not sure what else to say other than that. I think he'd just be like very thrilled about it. I guess the other thing that is in my mind is I think he'd be very thrilled that we're involved. And I think it actually just touches on something that we're sharing, all three of us, is that we were not, following his professional career. We loved him. We had our own different relationship with him personally. He would give us each book of his, that was published when it came out as a gift. And I don't believe that any of us have read any of his books entirely. I myself tried to read Early Mormonism, The Magic World View. Okay, this is a really interesting topic, and then I started reading it. And it was like, this is so dry. And it's just not my field. It's just like not my area of interest. And I know that might sound like blasphemy or something in this room, but it's just like this is not our field. And I know, and I feel very moved thinking about it, if he were aware, and I myself don't know that he is aware, looking down and smiling, but if I had that thought of him being able to see us involved in the way that we are, it would be profoundly moving to him, given that context that I just shared with you. And I feel very excited about that myself, feeling like I'm involved in his life, in his career, in ways that I wasn't before, and so that's really meaningful to me, and I know that would be very meaningful to him.
Yeah, I echo all of that, and like I said just a little bit earlier, just reading the little bit that I have has already made me feel closer to my dad in spirit, and I look forward to finishing the book. Probably my first one.
First and only.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge again, I mentioned Gary Bergera already, who was the first person at Signature who had the manuscript. I also want to acknowledge Maxine Hanks, a dear friend of Mike's, who read through the book and provided blurbs. You could see what she wrote about the book is on the front, the first page, and also helped with the footnotes, making sure we had things right. And then also Connell Donovan, who was a dear friend of Mike's and is found throughout the book as well. He was also an annotator. Did I miss anyone that I'm not seeing that's here in the back? Okay. Well, like I mentioned, I'm looking around this room. Okay, somebody's saying me. Yes? No? Okay. Okay. Oh, grandchildren! Oh, come on. Will you come up? Come on up. Yes, we need to acknowledge Mike's grandchildren. Absolutely. Come on up. As I mentioned, I'm looking around the room and half of you are in this book. So I think you're going to love reading it. Come on up. Introduce yourselves. Oh, you're Lisa's girls.
Yeah. So we are the daughters of Lisa over here. My name is Sophia, and this is Sonia. Yeah. He's our grandfather. Can you tell everybody what you called your grandpa? Oh, Opa. Opa is grandpa in German. There it is. Yeah. Opa. It also means celebration.
In
Greek.
In Greek, it means celebration. I didn't know that. Yeah.
There are two seats right in the front. You stay
Okay.
right in front here.
Thank you.
I can just add. To add a little bit. I mean, he did. He was in Munich, counterintelligence, with the army, military intelligence, and so there is that background. He was interested in German. Like there's part of the memoir. There's a strand there. But something I just want to add is that we just had this family tradition, having lived in Austria for 5 months when he was teaching in the study abroad program with Brigham Young University. Since that time, we would call him Fati, and we would call our mother Mutti. And that carries on even today in some form. And so the Opa thing with the grandkids is a continuation, of that family history.
Okay, I think we'll open it now to your questions. Please be brief. But also, I see many of you here are very close to Mike. So if you want to briefly, so everybody has time to share a story that you experienced with Mike, we welcome you to do that too.
So on the personal side, were there any aha moments from the manuscript that you were kind of shocked or surprised by?
Okay, so I'll repeat I think what I'll do is I'll take the mic around. It'd probably be better so
Well, you can
people in
just
the
repeat
back,
that one, sir.
the people in the back can hear.
So on the personal side, was there any surprise or aha moments that the manuscript revealed that you had no idea until you read it?
I guess I do have something. I mean, for me, there's a real frank sexuality. You know, as he's talking about his boyhood and his coming of age. And so, not that that's I didn't realize that was part of your experience as a human being. There's nothing shocking about that. But in reading the frankness, I mean, that's just an interesting aspect of my father that he didn't talk to me about those things. I didn't talk to him about those things in that way, that personal way. And just in general, our father was, I would describe him as emotionally reticent. I mean, he was a very warm person. But he was not always talking about himself. That was not his personality. If you asked him questions, like Mary mentioned a moment ago, if you asked him questions, he would answer very openly and freely. But he was not an open book kind of person in the sense that he was always just divulging. And so this memoir is just a very different experience of him really just talking about himself all the time, of course. It's a memoir. And that's just a very different thing. It's a very different kind of experience than I ever saw from him and my relationship with him. And so in general, that's kind of an aha. It's a really different mode or a really different facet, seeing with my father in terms of expressing and sharing stories about his life. And then, like I said a moment ago, this kind of frankness of his sexuality and his dreams, his wishes, his yearnings, his longings, his fantasies, and that being a really big part of the memoir it's just very different as well from anything that I saw, in person with him.
Thank you.
About that. I feel like my experience with my dad in terms of just to tack on to what Moshe was saying, my dad I feel like was a very closed person in general, and it's really refreshing for me to get to know him through the book. I feel like I didn't really know my dad at all, and it's sad for me to admit that, because I would have liked to have known him while he was here. But when I say, I'm excited in the book because I feel closer to him by reading the little bit of the book that I have, I mean that truly, sincerely. And I'm talking about his life with his sister and my grandpa and people that I wish I knew more about when they were here. So, sorry. Getting a little emotional, but it's part of him that I never got to really see, and so I'm excited about that. And it's a meaningful part for me personally. I don't know how deep that will be for other people, but for me personally, excited about.
Lisa, I didn't know you before. I just met you yesterday, really for the first time. I got to talk with you yesterday for the first time, but as editor of the book, what I came across to me was how much he loved each one of you. He loved you children, and how proud he was of you and your daughters.
To clarify, there was no question. We all knew how much he loved us. That there was no doubt. It's just he was just very much, I don't know how to really explain it. He just wasn't very sharing of himself. He was just kind of inept that way. He wasn't mean, or I don't know how to really explain it. He just wasn't really embracing with his himself and his openness about himself and his life. But there was no question. I knew I could call him and be supported by him. And there was no doubt in my mind that he loved my children and myself. and my family. There was never any doubt about that. So to be clear about that, it just had to do with this depth of sharing about himself and his life, and the way that we all fit in it. It was hard to navigate with him. So, yeah.
One of the things he talks about that in the memoir quite a bit, and he says that he had become so good at suppressing his sexuality starting when he was a boy that he suppressed his emotions so much that it was hard for him to express. That it definitely comes out in the memoir. Okay, anyone want to share a story or ask a question? Share a memory?
I do.
Connell, Rocky. Mike calls Connell Rocky.
So, in 1979, I was head over heels in love with a young man in your ward named Quinn, Eve's son. Eve, yeah. And I came to Sunday school in your ward on a date, sort of, with Aubin. And your father was teaching the lesson, and it was on Jesse Gauss being the first member of the first presidency, and not Frederick Granger, but there had been this revelation in the DNC that the church had published, and they put Frederick's name in there, but it had originally been directed to Jesse. And I just remember it absolutely blew me away, because what? The church had changed the Doctrine and Covenants and covered up, who this was originally meant for and all this other stuff. And I was like, I am moving into this ward. So I did. And then, and of course, he really inspired me greatly to do history, especially LGBT history. So I love your dad so much, and I miss him very deeply. Your grandpa, Opa. Oh, yeah.
So I asked.
Sorry, everybody, I don't know where we're
a speaker there. It's good.
Okay, I will not go by the speaker.
Okay, so I just asked Connell for permission to share this story, but as I started editing the manuscript and I told my friend Connell I was working on it, he said, "Oh, does Mike ever talk about me?" And I said, "Yeah, he talks about you." And then he said, "Does he ever talk about me in the back of the van driving home from a movie?" I said, "What? No, what are you talking about?" I kept reading. But anyway, so Connell said, "I kissed Mike." This was, of course, after Mike was divorced. But he said, "I kissed Mike one night." And then I said, "No, I haven't gotten to that part yet." But I got to that part. And then I said, "Connell, Mike wrote that you were his first gay kiss."
I was.
So, sweet story. So, okay, other stories or questions? Okay, Sandra, come up here so we don't go to the speaker. This is Sandra Tanner.
Well, I've read more of his book than you have, but I haven't quite finished it. I'm just getting up to the part where I come in. So maybe my opinion would change if I get to the end. But I have really enjoyed reading his book because I didn't know Mike in a personal way, and we were kind of on opposite sides of the street. But I very much enjoyed, well, I don't know how to say enjoyed, I appreciated seeing Mike's side of his story of his life coming from the other side. I mean, I left Mormonism and he wrote against us, and if you read the book, we're at the back. But I had a great connection to him because I'm just a couple of years older than him. We both were down in the San Fernando Valley. I was just slightly ahead of him, and he's going through all these life experiences, and I'm thinking, well, I know those people, I know that person. And historically, the people that all you guys aren't going to know because you aren't old enough. coming up through the Vietnam War and church history and all the church historians, I thought, well, this is a different take because I knew them all from different sides of the street. But I really appreciated his book and his frankness. I empathized with him in his struggle on being gay, and I felt very moved and sad. The struggle he had with the church that he loved so dearly. I mean, that's the saddest thing in it, is that here's the guy that wanted to be the ultimate Mormon, and his church wouldn't accept him. So I felt very, very sad for him in all of that struggle. I really appreciated his commitment to research. And when I would read about all the books he's reading at such a young age, I'm thinking, oh my word, did he ever sleep? I mean, my husband read books, but he looks like a kindergarten compared to Quinn. He just lists off all these books he's reading, and I'm thinking, when does he ever have time to have dinner? He was an incredible researcher. It's just astounding to me what all he read, and so I've gained a greater appreciation for him. I've always appreciated his research. I buy all his books, and I've read most of them, not all of them. I mean, there is a limit, Yes, we're still struggling on Mormon hierarchy.
Volume 12.
12. But I just want to say how much it has been informative and encouraging to me to read his story. And I found it all very interesting because I thought his take on the Vietnam War, for me, I mean, I went through that. When he talks about trying to decide whether to go to Canada, I mean, this was real. I mean, I know people that did this. I know this part of the story, and it was a very tense, hard time. And so, yeah, if you aren't as old as me, a lot of this history, I mean, Nixon stuff, I mean, how many of you were around for Nixon, a few of you. There was a few gray hairs out here. But, so, yeah, it's my history as far as the decades that he goes through. So, I have enjoyed the book in many different ways, not just on the Mormon stuff, but on just the general history that we all went through, the LA riots, all the different areas that he talks about in these different things, to me, were insights of things that I had forgot about, moments of history that we shared. So I enjoyed the book. I think it's a great read. Maybe you have to be a little older to appreciate a lot of the stories. But I came away with a greater understanding and empathy for Mike and appreciation of him, because I didn't know him personally, that it opened a side to him that I have really enjoyed.
Thank you for sharing that, Sandra. And as Sandra mentions, he writes about the conflict between himself and Gerald and Sandra Tanner, and I love hearing your appreciation for him, and I know he'd appreciate you saying that, I'm sure. Other questions or thoughts, memories? Over here, Christian Anderson, son of Lavina Fielding Anderson and Paul Anderson. Whoa!
Hey. So towards the end of the memoir, he talks about all the people who, give him hugs at the Sunstone Symposium, and I was surprised. I thought I was the only one, but he was always so happy to see me, and he was the only one of my parents' friends who really took me seriously in high school. As he probably had to be pretty generous to do that. I was thought I knew a lot more than I did. As Moshe would know, we took a few classes together at West High back in the day. But,
yeah, we had Latin. I remember Latin together. Yeah, and some others.
Yep. But I think the most vivid memory I have of Mike, he was always friendly and welcoming to new people. Lots of people can tell stories about just striking up a conversation with him randomly at Sunstone and not finding out until years later that he was probably the preeminent scholar of Mormonism, that he was just interested in other people. But he was also, I feel like some of that was a deflection mechanisms to not let people in. I, met him a lot. We had dinner together a lot. But I didn't really ever get a good glimpse of who he was inside, except one time we were having a dinner with Aaron Silva, who's a local historian and poet, and he read 3 or 4 poems, including one to Adam that he'd written just after the suicide, and was asking how, after he'd read this, said, what would, if you'd known, what would you have done differently? And there was, you could see the pain and the self-doubt and everything, and then you could kind of see the mask go back on. And he said, I don't think we could have done, I don't think I could have lived knowing that. That would have been too much of a burden to carry, which is probably true, but is also a way of avoiding self-reflection. And I was curious if any of you had insight on that. So he wrestles with himself a little bit about trying to uncover his father's secrets, while he himself is keeping the biggest secret of all, right, from everyone he knows. But he never really wrestles with himself about the effect of being raised by a father who is closed and hidden from his children, with what that does to his children, how he sees that affecting his own fatherhood. And I'm wondering if you have any insight into how he resolved that, or if that was one of the things he carefully didn't think about, or anything.
Real quick before I pass this to the children, did you say your mom, was she able to read this before she passed away? Or was it just September 6th that she read before?
So Mike had actually sent her at least 2 of the versions. And I think she had everything that he'd written, because it was about, this thick, the typewritten manuscript that she had. So she got it in 2006, 2007, and
Okay, so to answer Christian's question.
I could go at the end if you want to start.
I've touched a lot on this, what you've been talking about, and I honestly can just kind of briefly summarize, because we didn't get a chance to, talk to our dad before he passed. He passed suddenly, so in that way, it's kind of a shame, someone gets sick and maybe you have time to kind of ask questions before they pass, and my dad passed quick and without us there, and we didn't get a chance. But it is my firm opinion and belief that our dad, the few times where I got close to addressing the big issue that you're touching on, he was so broken that he couldn't face it. It nearly destroyed him. And he would become, I would find out later on from friends that would tell me later, he would become suicidal and just so broken that he just couldn't face it. So I just never would try after knowing that. And that was when I was in my teens. So I would say no. I just think he was a broken person about it, and he knew that, and he didn't know how to really get past that. So that would be my guess. But
there's a lot to, I don't know, it's like touching on our brother's death and how that impacted our father. I mean, I don't really know in a sense, because we were all, I mean, my perspective is that we were all just trying to get by.
Yeah. For sure.
But what you were like touching on, like his father, like how you're framing the question, like with his father and how his father was concealing and how his father was distant from him. One thing that got me thinking about how our father was like really consciously trying to cultivate being a parent in a certain way that was an answer and a correction to what he saw from his father. So he really felt that he was doing his best to be very present, to be very close, and to be very comforting, to be very available as a very supportive father. And he was in a lot of ways. And then it was also interesting, like, I'm not sure if it was because of Landmark, but like there was like at this time in the early 90s when it seemed like he was like consciously trying to like make this effort to ask us how he's doing, basically, like, you know, like is there some way that I've failed? I'm not sure if he framed it that way, but I remember like there were a series of conversations, at least I had with him, and I had the sense that he was maybe having similar-ish kinds of conversations with you. I don't know, because I wasn't part of those conversations, but I had the sense that there was this thing that he was trying to do to like give us a chance to tell him what we thought and how we felt. Does that ring a bell for you? Because I really felt it was like this overt. Yeah. Yeah, as I recall. Yeah, and that happened with me, so I just thought it was like happening for you as well. And so like in those conversations, like I had like, I mean, it was just really interesting because there was things that came up that I just hadn't really thought about before, but since he invited me into that space of sharing, it did get me thinking about, oh, actually, that's, now that you mention it, you know, like maybe there's this, and this, and I didn't realize it was like a thing until like you asked me if I thought that there was anything lacking or anything missing, and so it was not that I had a lot to like gripe about, but there were some things, you know, of course there's always things, and so there were some things that came up, and I remember sensing that was a difficult. Actually, I knew it was difficult because he actually shared with me, like he reflected back to me like that was a difficult process for him, because one of the things that he shared was despite his best efforts, despite his best intentions, trying to be a corrective to what he saw from his father, he realized, hearing from me and maybe also from his other children, that he didn't quite do as good a job as he had intended, as he had hoped for. And so there was a recognition that he was repeating maybe some of the same mistakes, not exactly the same, but more so than he had hoped for, you know, that he got from his father. He thought that he was very emotionally present with us, but as Lisa had shared, and to some degree as I saw myself, there was this distance. And maybe it was a practiced distance, but it's also like maybe like what he just knew from his own upbringing and what he saw, you know, in his own upbringing, and how it's hard to like live beyond what you see growing up in your own family, which I think is just very true. So he tried, but there were some real limits to like how far he could go, especially with, I mean, I'm not even sure if like his concealment of his sexuality is really part of that story. He thought it was. I'm not sure if it's, I mean, I think there's a lot more to it than that, but that was part of his own self-perception. I believe that was part of the story of like his practiced self-concealing or his practiced self-withholding. But aside from that, and in addition to that, I do want to share as my own testimony, in a sense, about my father. He was a really profoundly good listener. And this comes up in the memoir as well. It's actually part of this dynamic of like how he was not able to share himself or divulge himself with others in the way that he needed to as a human being. And that was sort of stunting him emotionally and socially. He cultivated a way to be a really profoundly good listener for other people. And there was, there's a negative edge to that, of course. There's some dysfunction in that. And yet, it was really helpful for me. Because my father and I thought in really similar ways and responded to things. We were sensitive to things in really similar ways. And so when I was really struggling, depressed, if I needed to vent, he was always profoundly present and listened in a certain, with a certain quality that was always just very, very helpful to me, and very constructive, and helped me feel heard and helped me feel seen in ways that was just deeply comforting. And so he was really great for me in that way, despite his own withholdings and these ways that I never really saw his true heart, his true feelings. There was that, which was a very positive thing that I had in my life.
Well, I'll end by just sharing a couple of the surprises that I had, and Moshe knows this already, but I was reading and I read about Mike's mother and grandparents after the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. They were taken in by a family named Preston and Barbara Richards. Those are my great-grandparents.
Wow.
So I called Moshe immediately and I said, your dad's family was taken in by my family in 1933, and they lived with my family in the 30s until they could get back on their feet again. So it just kind of felt like, okay, this is meant to be. Yeah, incredible. In fact, and then recently my mother shared with me my grandmother's 1933 to 35 journal when she was a teenage girl. So she would have been a teenager at the time. So I eagerly looked through the 33 journal. All she talks about is boys. So anyways, the other surprise for me that I did not know was Mike talked about two great mentors in his life, and I already mentioned that Leonard Arrington was one of them. The other was his mission president. And he talks about being called to the British mission. He dearly wanted to go to Germany. He was very disappointed when he was called to the British mission in London. And he talks about walking into the mission home and meeting the 41-year-old mission president, Marion D. Hanks. And Marion D. Hanks was profoundly good to him. It meant a lot to your dad. And I think also it's no coincidence that recently Richard Hanks, who has written the biography of his father, Marion D. Hanks, brought that biography and he's publishing it with signature. And so, Richard Hanks, come in here. Okay, this is not a coincidence either. Rich!
All these nasty things about me.
Come on in. Rich! This is Richard Hanks, who has just written a biography of his father, Marion D., and I'm editing his book, and I don't know how he likes me or not very much right now.
She's doing a great job. I'm not sure what you want me to say. Hi. I knew your dad very little. Actually saw him at the Salt Lake Clinic right before he died, I guess, or maybe it was a year before, and sat down with him and we chatted about my dad a little bit. So my dad loved your dad.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fake, it wasn't put on, it was genuine, heartfelt, and I actually know a whole lot of things about your dad. They're in the book, you have to buy them. I don't know, anyway, congratulations on this coming out, and I obviously haven't read it, but I will. Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, so Marion D. Hanks is throughout the Quinn memoir, and then as I'm reading Marion D. Hanks's biography, I'm seeing so much of the influences how he influenced your dad. So it's been really neat to edit these two books together. So please join me in thanking the Quinn children. Or do you wait, Moshe wants to ask something.
There's something on my mind, and I don't know where this is going to go, but in reading the memoir, there's a strand in this that's made me curious about something, about Mormon culture, that I want to ask everyone here pretty much if you have any insights to share about it. Because I'm not really part of Mormon culture. I think that we maybe all identify that way. We're kind of very much outside. And so there's a lot that I don't know, that we don't know. So there's this thing about our father when he was young, where he really not only wanted to be an apostle, loving his church so much, but also seeing that for himself. Not just wanting it, but seeing it. And it wasn't just seeing it that I had this question about. He talks about receiving blessings from patriarchs where they would say things and prophecy about his life and say things that would suggest they wouldn't say, oh, you will be an apostle, but they would say things that would make it really easy to interpret that that's what they meant that he would be or something like an apostle later in his life. And so I was just like, I had this curiosity, is like, and maybe like things are different now, or maybe this is not a thing at all, but like, is it common that like when you receive a blessing from somebody who's an elder in the church or a patriarch, that they say something that suggests that you're going to be an apostle if you're a male Mormon? Like, is that just a common thing?
Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. So it wasn't just our father projecting. It's like this common thing in Mormon culture. It's like an encouragement, it seems, like an encouragement to like...
They leave that door open so you aspire for it.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, and that was my question, because it seems like it, and I had no idea if it was more of our father's lens or just like what is in culture.
And the women get told how many children they're going to have.
And how many of their children will be apostles.
So your dad actually does write about this a little bit in the memoir. He says that in the mission field when he was serving under Marion D. Hanks, that it was predicted that someone serving under him would become an apostle someday. So Mike did, and he writes about this, he admits that he always thought he would be an apostle someday. What is very interesting is 2 of Marion D. Hanks's missionaries were Elder Jeffrey R. Holland and Elder Quentin L. Cook. So, interesting. Okay, please join me again in thanking the grandchildren. So they'd be happy to sign books up here. We're going to have a table across here if you haven't had a chance to have them sign a book yet. Also, I want to acknowledge 2 more people. I want to acknowledge Signature's marketing manager, Deborah Anderson, who's here tonight, who's helped, and Signature's marketing specialist, Beth Brummer-Reeve. They do the important work of spreading the word about this book and these events.